Hey everyone, I've been meaning to start a vlog for a while now, and finally gotten around to it. I have such a busy life that I come home, I pretty much just sleep here, so either at work or my girlfriend's house or school or something like that. So I'm pretty tired when I get home, and that's my excuse for never really starting. So anyway, a new development has come to pass, and a lot of people on Facebook will probably see this, where I hang out a lot, and but for those of you who just happen to cross me here on YouTube, you may not know me, but I've been a libertarian for many years now. Or have I? Now that's the point of this video. Actually, when I first started getting into libertarianism, I was almost pretty much veering off into anarchy. But someone kind of identified my philosophy as libertarianism and talked about New Hampshire, the Free State Project, and everything, and so I kind of just latched onto that, and when Ron Paul came along, it was all downhill from there. Now this year, for all of you Ron Paul lovers, all you libertarians, and when I was talking about libertarianism, I was differentiating it from anarchism. But you know, a lot of anarchists call libertarians because essentially libertarian believes in a non-coercion principle. And if you don't know what that is, you can look it up or explain it later in another video. And it generally we believe in sort of a community-based lifestyle, and believe that's the only way real change ever happens. But when I say libertarianism, I'm using it kind of in the sense of minarchism, where just like talking about the smallest government possible that protects civil rights. Now, I'll explain to you why that doesn't make sense. Because the past few days, especially the past few months, I've been veering off into anarchy. And the past few days has really solidified. And it's like I can't really help it, because it's more like my eyes have been opened, and now I want to show you why you are I'll have to edit this. I'll show you. I'm sorry. I want to show you why you are an anarchist too. Yes, you are. Let me give you some good but shocking news that you will probably find hard to believe at first. For all of you who have struggled changing and reforming the federal government, and this is a wide swath of people, it includes right now conservative Republicans of all stripes, and it has concerned, you know, liberals, progressives, Democrats, but they've, to their mind, have received a huge victory this year in the elections. Of course, in the House, Republicans, you know, have left a lot of their own. But anyway, so we've been frustrated, we've been tired, we've been outraged, and we've been silenced. And for those, you know, people of all stripes, especially libertarians, we've got the brunt of it. I'm here to tell you some good news. The federal government doesn't exist. That's right, you hear me. The federal government doesn't exist. The state is a fiction. Sure, there are people who dress up in suits and they go to a dome building and they sign bits of paper and they have speeches, and there's a guy who lives in a certain house, certain mansion that's painted white on a certain avenue, and he writes things on pieces of paper, and he talks in front of cameras, and other people in other buildings, they write things on pieces of paper, and other people follow what is written down on these pieces of paper. And of course, they tell other people that who are dressed in uniforms what to do, and these people come out and do certain things that affect our society as a whole. Of course, one can argue that society is a fiction too, but basically society is a group of people living in close proximity and engaging in activities that involuntary exchanges and involuntary exchanges. And then there are 9 guys dressed in black robes who say certain things, and they listen to certain people who come into the certain room that they work in, and that they do all these things in, and these 9 people talk together privately, and they come to decisions amongst themselves, and then when they are done, they say that everybody who lives within a certain geographical section of land, of dirt, must do as they say. So that is what people call the federal government. But does it actually exist, or is it just a collection of people doing things? Now, many of you will insist that the federal government does exist. That you'll say, despite despite the fact that this is actually what is going on, there is something called the federal government, and that it is the aggregate of all these things. But let me suggest to you that this is a new idea, spawned by a guy named Hobbes, and he's not the cute, fuzzy, stuffed tiger that ran around with the jerk-ass boy. He's a jerk-ass philosopher. And a philosopher is someone who writes down certain words, and he sort of speaks certain words, and they inspire people. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that trail. But, so Hobbes suggested that there's such a thing as a social contract, and as a result there is a state, there's an aggregate of, or there is an entity that is said to exist through this mutual contract, and I'm just simplifying, kind of glossing over this these concepts, but so basically there's a social contract, and if you're born within a certain geographical bound on a certain section of dirt, then you are held under this agreement, which is basically certain stipulations that you must abide by, and that the aggregate of people working under this fiction called the state must abide by. And essentially that is where we get our modern concept of the state. Before this, basically you'll find people thinking of rulership in terms of people. So there's a king, there's a Caesar, there's an emperor, there's advisors, there are senators, etc. But is there a state? Well, think about how ancient people thought about the government. Not only, we were familiar with the concept of the divine right of kings, which is another huge fiction, but in itself, but it's not the state. It's not quite the developed concept that Hobbes came up with. But and then there were emperors and pharaohs who were considered gods, and so there's another whole abstract concept attached to rulership. But they were still identified as individuals. But now we have this entity which, no matter how many individuals come in and out of of these offices, which is basically no, I'm not even going there. So yeah. Anyway, no matter any people kind of exchange positions, this entity stays intact, and I find it funny. So all these and perhaps the people who right now would most object to this these concepts, especially since Republicans tend to be, at least in name, they tend to be small government focused, and especially since now Republicans are probably going to dissent the most against the government. Speaking to the Democrats and the progressives and those who would insist that there is such a thing called the state and the federal government, aren't you being a little hypocritical? At least those of you who believe that corporations aren't actually people. And they're not, and you're right, they aren't people. Romney was an idiot when he said that corporations are people. I don't know how he thought he could get away with that, but they're not people, but they are a group of people making decisions, and they're bound by certain contracts, which basically means that they're expected to abide by certain words and stipulations. And basically, I mean, you can get reductionist ad nauseum, and you're probably never going to boil things down to nothing but empirical occurrences. But we can get as close as we can. So yeah, I mean, you don't believe that corporations are people, but suddenly when a bunch of people get together to make decisions that we are forced to abide by, suddenly that constitutes some kind of entity that's not called a corporation, but it is called a government. Now, is there really any difference between the two? Now, if you believe that there is something called a right of authority, then I guess you would believe that, but that thing is not non-observable. There's nothing that makes that gives one person authority over another. Nothing tangible, nothing we can observe. It's at best a social contract that people supposedly agree to, but don't really, because I never signed a paper that says that these people have authority over me. And so I don't consent. And this is why I realize that I'm an anarchist. I didn't decide to be, because my eyes were merely open to the fact that I am one. That I live in an anarchy because there is no such thing as the government. It's actually a private entity, if you want to look at it truthfully. And that doesn't make sense, because if there's nothing else other than private entities, then there's nothing to distinguish, then there's no reason to call it a private entity, because it's just basically a bunch of guys and gals, and they're having an effect on our lives based on the fact that we believe that they have the right to. And it takes so long sometimes to reveal to people the obvious. The obvious is what is in front of our eyes. So, yeah. So that's what I've come to, and I'd like to let you know that after